Michael Barnes stepped off the shuttle and into the bustling terminal of O'Hare International, clutching a worn leather briefcase in one hand and adjusting the crooked tie at his neck with the other. The morning rush swallowed him whole, waves of travelers with rolling suitcases and hurried footsteps all pressing forward, all with somewhere important to be. He was just another face in the crowd, but to him, this day meant everything. His heart beat fast. Not from the walk, but from the weight of what was ahead. He had taken the overnight bus from a small town in Kentucky, nodding in and out of sleep with his forehead pressed against the window, dreaming of what might come next. His gray suit, though carefully selected the night before, was wrinkled at the elbows and slightly too big at the shoulders. Still, he held his head high. This was his shot, the kind of job interview that could change the trajectory of his entire life. He moved quickly, dodging clusters of families and coffee carts, the PA system barking out gate changes and final boarding calls overhead. Gate C-19. That was his destination. The ticket in his pocket was for a flight to Boston, where a financial firm called Andrews and Kent was set to meet with him at 2 p.m. sharp. He had practiced his answers, polished his resume, read the company's mission statement so many times he could quote it backwards. This wasn't just another interview, it was the interview. As he turned the final corner, a flash of movement caught his eye. Near the edge of the check-in counters, an elderly woman stood hunched beside a suitcase that looked nearly twice her size. Her silver hair had slipped from its bun, and her coat had fallen slightly off one shoulder. She gripped the handle of the bag with both hands, trying to lift it onto the belt, her thin arms trembling with effort. No one stopped. Businessmen walked past, headphones in. A couple pulling a pink stroller moved around her without looking. A teenage boy wheeled his skateboard close, then veered away. Everyone was in a rush, everyone had somewhere to be, just like him. Michael slowed. He told himself to keep moving, that she'd be fine, that airport staff would help. He even looked back at the gate once more. He still had time, just barely. But then he heard his mother's voice in his head, soft but firm, like it always was when he was about to make the wrong kind of choice. Being successful don't mean much if you forget how to be kind. His hand tightened around the strap of his briefcase. He stopped walking. Michael stood frozen for a moment, his body tilted slightly forward, torn between two impulses, one tugging him toward the gate, the other pulling him back to the struggling woman. Every second counted. He could still make it if he kept moving. He could slide through the boarding line, settle into his seat, and tell himself he hadn't seen her. That she was someone else's responsibility. That his future, his carefully planned, desperately hoped-for future, was more important. But the longer he stood there, the harder it was to turn away. He glanced back once more. She was trying again, knees bent slightly, hands clenched tight around the handle. The suitcase didn't budge. Her face pinched with frustration and fatigue. Michael sighed. A soft, bitter sound escaped his chest. The kind you make when you know you're about to do something that might cost you everything, and you do it anyway. He turned around and walked back. "Ma'am, can I help you with that?" She looked up, startled. Her eyes were watery, soft, a little lost, but when she saw his face, she smiled like he was the first person to look her in the eye all morning. "Oh dear, that would be such a blessing. It's heavier than I expected. I've tried, but I just can't manage." Michael reached down, grabbed the suitcase, and in one motion lifted it onto the conveyor belt. It thudded into place. The woman exhaled in relief. "You're an angel," she said, placing a frail hand on his arm. "Just happy to help, ma'am." He nodded politely, turned around, and sprinted. His shoes slapped hard against the polished airport floor. The gate was right ahead, just a few steps now. He could hear the boarding announcement echoing through the speakers. He shouted, "Wait. Please. I'm here." The gate agent didn't even look up. "I'm sorry, sir." The doors closed. He reached the counter, chest heaving, face flushed. "You don't understand. I have to be on that flight." But it was over. The agent gestured helplessly toward the sealed jet bridge. Michael stood there, breathless and defeated, watching the plane pull away from the terminal. Just like that, it was gone. And with it, the opportunity he had spent years chasing. Michael leaned against the gate counter, trying to slow his breathing. His hands rested on his knees, his tie slightly askew, sweat dampening the collar of his shirt. The reality of what had just happened hit him like a cold wave. One flight. One interview. One shot at everything he'd been working toward, and now it was gone. He didn't hear her footsteps approach, soft as they were on the linoleum floor. "Excuse me, dear." He turned. The elderly woman stood behind him, suitcase now properly checked, her small frame framed in the harsh airport lighting. Her brows pinched gently, and there was concern in her voice. "Did you miss your flight? Because of me?" Michael straightened up, managing a tight smile. He could see the worry in her eyes, the guilt starting to settle in her expression, and the last thing he wanted was to make her feel worse. "It's all right, ma'am. I'll figure something out. There are other flights." She looked at him for a long moment. Long enough to see past the suit, past the polite words, into the quiet disappointment behind his eyes. "You're a kind young man," she said softly. "That's hard to find these days." She reached into her handbag, an elegant black leather purse with a subtle gold clasp, and pulled out a sleek white business card. No logo. Just a name, embossed in silver lettering, Grace Ellison. Below it, a title, Chief Executive Officer, Ellison Holdings. Michael took it with both hands, almost out of reflex. Then he looked at the name again. His breath hitched. Grace Ellison. The name didn't just sound familiar, it was iconic. It was the subject of late-night case studies in his MBA program, the focus of magazine spreads in Forbes, Fortune, and Business Insider. She'd built one of the largest privately held conglomerates in the country from scratch: real estate, tech, retail, even energy. And now, she was standing in front of him. Silver hair, warm eyes, quiet voice. The same woman he'd just helped lift a suitcase. His gaze flicked between the card and her face. You're Grace Ellison?" She smiled, calm, almost amused. "I am." He felt the floor shift beneath him. All the things he could have said vanished. Grace looked past him toward the gate. "You said you were headed to Boston?" He nodded, still speechless. "Interview?" "Yes, ma'am. With Andrews and Kent." She gave a small nod, eyes narrowing just slightly. "A respectable firm. Very competitive." Then she looked back at him with something different in her expression, curiosity, and maybe something more. "Well, Michael Barnes, maybe you just showed up to the wrong meeting today." Grace's eyes lingered on Michael a moment longer, her expression unreadable. Then she gently gestured toward the terminal lounge nearby. "Come, sit with me for a while." Michael hesitated, casting a glance at the departure screen as if still hoping time might bend backward and hand him his missed opportunity. But it didn't. The flight was gone, and the woman standing beside him was no longer just a stranger with a heavy suitcase. She was Grace Ellison. And for reasons he couldn't quite grasp, she was still talking to him. They made their way to a quiet corner of the lounge, where the chairs were softer and the buzz of the crowd faded just enough to feel human again. A large window overlooked the tarmac, the morning light warming the room in a golden hue. Grace settled into the chair like someone used to commanding boardrooms and conversations alike. Michael sat opposite, unsure of what to say, or what was expected of him. She leaned forward slightly, folding her hands on her lap. "Tell me something, Michael. Who are you, beyond the suit and the missed flight?" He blinked, caught off guard. Most people asked what he did. She asked who he was. He took a breath. "Well, I'm from a small town outside Bowling Green, Kentucky. My parents run a farm, been doing it their whole lives. Not a big one. We raise soybeans, mostly. Some corn. It's enough to get by, not much more." She nodded, saying nothing, just letting him go on. I worked the fields growing up. Then got into Western Kentucky University, first in my family to go to college. I took classes during the day, cleaned offices at night. Paid my way through. A faint smile tugged at Grace's lips. Finance major? Yes, ma'am. Graduated top of my class. I've always wanted to work in investment strategy. Not just for the money, but to understand how the world works. How capital moves. How you build something from nothing. He stopped, suddenly self-conscious. His voice had gotten too eager, too personal. But Grace didn't flinch. And what would you do if someone gave you that chance? Michael met her eyes. I'd show them I was worth it. I'd work harder than anyone. I don't want shortcuts. I just want the door to open, once. Just once. Grace leaned back, her gaze distant for a moment. You remind me of someone I used to be. Grace sat still for a long moment, as if weighing something in her mind. Then she reached once more into that elegant black purse and pulled out another business card, this one slightly thicker, its edges beveled. On the back, in tidy cursive, was a number written in dark blue ink. She slid it across the table, her eyes never leaving his. Call this number tomorrow morning. Before 9 o'clock sharp. Michael picked it up carefully, holding it like it might disappear if he blinked too hard. What happens if I do? Grace gave a small smile. Then we'll see if yesterday was just coincidence, or something more. He glanced down again. No company logo this time. Just a direct line. And if I don't? She tilted her head slightly. Then the opportunity passes. I don't extend things twice. Her voice wasn't harsh. It was firm, like someone who knew the value of time, and the price of hesitation. Michael nodded slowly, slipping the card into his inside pocket as if it were made of glass. Grace rose from her seat. I have a flight to catch, she said, adjusting the strap of her purse. But I meant what I said earlier, Michael. Some people wait for doors to open. Others knock until they do. He stood too, offering his hand. Thank you, ma'am. She looked at him for a beat longer. Don't thank me yet. And with that, she turned and disappeared into the crowd, her silhouette shrinking until it was just another figure among thousands. That night, Michael lay awake in the spare guest room of a friend's apartment, staring at the ceiling as the city lights bled through the blinds. The card sat on the nightstand beside him, silent but heavy with promise. His mind refused to quiet. Not because of nerves, not anymore. It was something deeper, a sense that the trajectory of his life had quietly shifted, as if some invisible hand had nudged him off the path he'd spent years carving. What if he hadn't stopped? What if he'd walked right past her? Would he be sleeping in Boston tonight, preparing for an interview that would come and go like so many others? Instead, he was here, haunted not by regret, but by the feeling that someone had seen something in him, something he wasn't even sure he saw in himself. By 2 a.m., he was still wide awake. By 5, he'd made his decision. And by the time the sun crept through the slats of the blinds, Michael Barnes was already sitting on the edge of the bed, freshly showered, tie in hand, phone resting in his palm, waiting for the clock to strike 8:59. At exactly 8:59 a.m., Michael's thumb hovered over the call button like it was a detonator. The room was silent, save for the ticking of an old wall clock in the hallway. He exhaled slowly and pressed it. The line rang once. Then, click. Good morning. Margaret Lawson's office. The voice on the other end was sharp, professional, female, efficient. Michael cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how dry it had become. Yes. This is Michael Barnes. I was told to call this number. There was a brief pause, followed by the sound of fingers tapping a keyboard. One moment, Mr. Barnes. The hold music was classical, elegant, and barely lasted a full breath before the line clicked again. Michael. He froze. The voice was warmer this time, familiar. Commanding. Yes, ma'am. "Good morning. I'm glad you called," she said, skipping over pleasantries. "Punctuality is a good sign." Michael stood instinctively, as if posture mattered on a phone call. "You asked me to. And you followed through. That tells me more than you think." There was a pause. Then, "My driver will arrive at your location in 30 minutes. Be ready." Michael blinked. "I'm sorry, ready for what?" But she had already ended the call. He stared at the phone for a moment longer, the dial tone humming in his ear. Then he checked the time, 9:01. 30 minutes. He jumped into motion, grabbing his blazer from the chair, buttoning it unevenly before trying again. He took one last look in the mirror, his tie slightly crooked, his nerves frayed but held together by something stronger, determination. Exactly 30 minutes later, a sleek black car rolled to a stop in front of the building. The driver, a tall man in a pressed charcoal suit, stepped out and opened the rear door without a word. Michael hesitated, just for a moment, then slid inside. The interior was quiet, the leather seats cool beneath his hands. The city blurred past the window, glass towers, busy sidewalks, yellow cabs darting through traffic like schools of fish. But Michael barely noticed. His thoughts were already ahead of him, racing toward wherever this car was taking him. What kind of place was he walking into? What did she want to see? Was this an interview, or something more? He didn't know. And for the first time in a long time, he was okay with not knowing. He just hoped, whatever it was, he'd be ready. The car pulled into a private drive and slowed to a stop before a tower of glass and steel that seemed to touch the clouds. The building bore no ostentatious signage, just a small plaque by the door that read Ellison Holdings in brushed metal letters, cool and quiet, like the kind of power that didn't need to announce itself. Michael stepped out slowly, taking in the scale of it all. The building shimmered in the morning light, its windows catching the sky, its edges sharp and precise like everything inside was measured to the millimeter. A woman in a tailored navy suit greeted him at the entrance. "Mr. Barnes?" "Yes, ma'am." "Right this way." She didn't explain. She didn't need to. They moved through polished marble corridors, past reception desks and quiet offices where men and women in suits tapped away at laptops or murmured into headsets. No one looked up, but everything about the space hummed with precision, like a well-oiled machine that didn't pause for introductions. At the far end of a hallway, a private elevator opened. She stepped in. So did he. Neither spoke as the numbers climbed. When the doors opened again, they revealed a floor unlike any Michael had ever seen. Carpeted in soft gray, the space opened into a massive office framed by floor-to-ceiling glass. From here, the entire city of Chicago stretched beneath them, rooftops, bridges, trains threading through streets like veins. It was a view made for decision-makers. And standing in front of it, arms loosely crossed, was Margaret Lawson. She didn't turn right away. Her silver hair shimmered under the natural light, catching the gold of the rising sun. When she finally faced him, her expression was calm, but not passive. She looked at him the way an artist sizes up a blank canvas. Not judging. Measuring. "Tell me, Michael," she said, her voice unhurried, clear. "What do you think matters more? The people who wait for opportunity, or the ones who create it?" Michael swallowed hard. There was no desk between them. No formal introduction. Just a question, direct and dangerous. He looked at her, standing there like she owned not just the room, but the air inside it. He cleared his throat. "I think, people who create it. Because waiting's a luxury most folks can't afford." Her brow lifted slightly. Not in surprise, more like acknowledgement. "Good answer," she said. Then, quietly, "Let's see what else you believe in." Margaret gestured toward the chairs near the window, two low, dark leather seats facing each other with a small walnut table between them. No formal desk. No computer. Just a quiet space made for conversation. Michael sat as instructed, legs stiff, unsure whether to cross them or plant them flat on the floor. He chose the latter. Margaret took the opposite chair with practiced ease, folding one leg over the other, her movements graceful but deliberate. She studied him for a moment, not with the piercing gaze of someone trying to intimidate, but with the calm patience of someone who had nothing to prove and everything to offer. "Tell me, Michael, when you saw me struggling with that suitcase, did you think I might be someone important?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am. I just saw someone who needed help." She nodded slowly, as if that answer mattered more than anything on his resume. "Good. Because most people don't help unless they believe it benefits them. But you stopped, not knowing who I was. That tells me something about the compass you live by." Michael wasn't sure what to say, so he said nothing. Margaret leaned back, her voice softening. "I wasn't born into this world, Michael. Not the world you're sitting in right now. I grew up in Memphis. One of 5 kids, single mother, tiny apartment above a corner store. I waited tables through high school and most of college. Wore second-hand shoes that pinched my feet. People looked right through me like I wasn't there." Michael listened, his chest tightening. "Then one day," she continued, "a man came into the diner. Older. Quiet. Sat in the same booth 3 mornings in a row. On the 3rd day, he handed me a napkin with his business card inside. Said he'd been watching how I worked. Said he saw something in me I didn't yet see in myself." She paused, eyes flicking toward the skyline outside. "I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning. Not of my career, of my belief that who you are when no one's watching matters more than who you are when they are." Michael leaned forward slightly. "That's why you stopped me?" She met his eyes. "I stopped you because I've spent my life betting on people with heart. You can teach strategy. You can't teach instinct, humility, or courage." She reached into a drawer beside her and pulled out a dark blue folder with the company's crest embossed in silver. She slid it across the table. Michael opened it slowly. The top page read, "Executive Leadership Development Program, Ellison Holdings." His name was already typed at the top. His pulse quickened. "You're offering me a position?" "I'm offering you a start," Margaret replied. "This program is rigorous. We don't hand it out like candy. But I believe you've earned a seat at the table, not because of your credentials, but because of your character." Michael's hands tightened slightly on the folder. He thought of the missed flight, the months of prep, the dream job in Boston he'd never even get to interview for. And yet this felt bigger, more real. "Why me?" Margaret smiled, just enough to soften her eyes. "Because when the world wasn't watching, you did the right thing anyway." She extended her hand. "So, Michael, are you ready to begin?" Michael sat in silence, the weight of the folder still pressing gently against his lap. His eyes lingered on the offer, his name in clean, bold type, the seal of Ellison Holdings shimmering faintly in the morning light. Just yesterday, his future had a shape. A clear, carefully mapped path. Boston, Andrews and Kent, entry-level analyst. Climb the ladder. Prove himself. Build something that looked like success. But now he was staring down a different road, one he hadn't planned for, one that didn't come with instructions or guarantees. It wasn't the dream he had prepared for. It was bigger, scarier, and strangely, more real. He looked up at Margaret, who remained quiet, giving him the space to choose. Not pushing, not persuading, just watching to see who he would decide to be. He thought of his parents back home, still working the same Kentucky soil their parents had tilled before them. He thought of all the nights he'd studied by lamplight, the hours spent in libraries and late-night shifts, all building toward one chance. Was this it? Or was this something better? He took a breath and let it out slow. "Yes, ma'am," he said finally. "I'm ready." A smile played at the corners of Margaret's mouth, not triumphant, but proud, like she'd known all along. "Then welcome to Ellison Holdings, Michael." And just like that, the world he thought he wanted faded behind him, and a new one began to take shape, formed not by strategy or certainty, but by the courage to act when no one was watching. Michael looked down at the folder again, then back up at Margaret. The question had been gnawing at him since she handed it to him. Why me? His voice was quiet. Honest. There are hundreds, thousands, of candidates more polished than me. People from Ivy League schools. People who didn't miss their flights. People with the right connections. Margaret's smile was faint, but steady. And yet, here you are. She rose from her chair and walked slowly to the window, gazing out over the city as if measuring its size against the weight of the moment. Do you want to know the truth, Michael? Most of the people who come through my doors can recite market projections, talk EBITDA in their sleep, and wear ambition like armor. But very few would stop for a stranger in an airport when they have something to lose. She turned, her expression serious now. You helped without knowing who I was. That's not something I see on resumes. That's instinct. That's character. And that is leadership. Michael felt the lump rise in his throat again, uninvited but undeniable. So this program, it's real? As real as anything in this building. But it won't be easy. I'm not handing you success, I'm handing you the chance to earn it, from the ground up. You'll be tested, challenged, even doubted. But if you stay true to the man you were yesterday, you'll go farther than you ever imagined. Michael stood now, folder still in hand. Then I'll give you everything I've got. Margaret stepped forward and extended her hand. Good. Because starting today, you're not just an employee. You're someone who carries your values into every room you enter. They shook hands, and it wasn't the kind of corporate handshake Michael had practiced in mock interviews. It was firm, yes, but it was human. Like a bridge being built between past and future, between who he had been and who he might yet become. She held his gaze. Make this mean something, Michael. Not just for you, but for the people watching when you don't think they are. He nodded once, his voice clear. I will. Michael stepped out of the towering glass building, the folder still tucked under his arm, but somehow it felt lighter now. The city buzzed around him, taxis honking, crosswalks blinking, morning light bouncing off metal and marble, but inside he felt a strange calm. He had walked in carrying the weight of a missed opportunity. He walked out carrying something far greater. The wind tugged gently at his coat as he stood on the curb, staring up at the floors above. Somewhere behind those mirrored windows, a woman had seen something in him that no resume ever could. Not potential measured in GPAs or internships, but in instinct, in heart. He thought of his parents back home, of the acres of soybean fields and early mornings. He thought of how proud his mother would be, not just of the offer, but of the choice. Sometimes, doing the right thing costs you something. And sometimes, it hands you a key to a door you never knew existed. He looked down at his reflection in the glass. Still the same suit, still the same man, but something had shifted. A quiet strength now lived beneath his collarbone. A sense that his life was no longer defined by a single interview missed, but by a moment answered. And it all began with a simple act of kindness. Sometimes, life doesn't reward the most prepared, it rewards the most human. If you believe that kindness still matters in this world, and that character is stronger than a resume, like this story, share it with someone you care about. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Justice Reloaded HD, where true stories meet second chances.